Well, good evening, everyone. Good evening. Yes. What a treat it is to have you here this evening. My name is John Costas. I have the privilege of serving as your mayor, and I just wanted to offer a few thoughts here, and then I'll turn it over to Councilman Cotton. It is always an encouragement to us when our citizens show up and make an investment of their time, which is what you're doing here today, and giving us input and helping us solve problems and helping us to envision the future. And so it is a great encouragement because you've got lots of things you could be doing, but to invest your time in your city is really a great help to us. So I trust that this will be a very informative and fulfilling time for you, and I know that it's going to be helpful to the city. So I want to thank Robert Cotton for organizing this, and I know housing has been something that's been on his mind as well as the mind of all of our council members, and there's lots happening. We've got a lot of good things happening, but we also have some opportunities that we need to step into too. So we're always trying to learn, always trying to make sure that we're meeting needs out there, and housing certainly is a challenge. In fact, I saw something on the internet, so it has to be true. You know, somebody said my parents sold their home in 1973 for $78,000. I have no idea where this is at, although I suspect it's California. And that same house just sold today for $4.4 million. And so that's part of why we're here today. But I also want to thank Heather Presley Cowan, who is with us. She enjoys an excellent reputation throughout the state for her expertise on housing. Has worked in many communities, and we're just glad to engage with her. We've learned a lot from her, and I'm sure you will here today. So Heather, we're just so glad that you can come down Route 30 from Fort Wayne and share your expertise with us today here. So, housing is a complex issue, and there are some aspects that we're doing pretty well. We're building a lot of housing. We are a community that people want to invest in. So there are some communities where there's no housing being built, and that's a different problem than what we have. But there are aspects of our housing that are really tough to build, and that's particularly entry-level housing. And so we're fortunate to have some great nonprofits. I think Paul Schreiner and others here are representing Project Neighbors, who's done great work for decades in our community. So that's part of the solution. There's no single bullet to solve any problem. So it's sort of all hands on deck, but we're fortunate to have some really great nonprofits helping us. Coaction. Anybody here from Coaction? Yes, thank you. Right. So again, there's some great players, and we're thankful. But we all need to be part of the solution. In terms of from the standpoint of the city, I mean, we're taking a hard look, and we have our city planners here, Bob and Jessica. Bob, raise your hand. Our city planner, and Jessica's in the planning department. And so we're trying to take a hard look at what is in our code that may be hindering opportunities for having more affordable housing. Are we conducive to accessory dwelling units? That's one solution. What about encouraging higher density in order to increase, to lower the cost of it? Because, but those are the things that we're trying to do internally, as well as work with our great nonprofits. So this is all part of the solution. You are part of the solution by just being here today. I want to thank you so much for making that investment, and I look forward to a great partnership going forward. With that, I'm going to introduce to you Robert Cotton, Councilman.
So, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, everyone who agreed to attend, and become a participant in this initiative. I'd like to introduce you to our panel. We will have panelists that reflect certain areas of specialty that will respond in a session following Heather Presley's presentation with specific questions that she'll ask. To the far right is Mr. Chris White. Chris White is the Chief Executive Officer of the United Way, Northwest Indiana. Next we have Mr. Zane Galloway, Partner Principal of Huber Galloway Realty, who called Little Winter. We have Mr. Patrick, may I say Rick Millier, Turner, Dyna Properties, big builder in South Loop of Chicago, tremendous pedigree in redevelopment, residential as well as commercial. Has some interest in Valpo, and a long-term resident as well. And then we have one of my long-term friends here, Jordan Stanfield. He is an executive housing expert. I call him a housing expert, and particularly with respect to the lower end of access, the starter type of stuff that the mayor referred to, and perhaps even beyond. But Jordan has his expertise is second to none with respect to how to figure out ways to get people into housing that might otherwise not be able to. And then, of course, another realtor who specializes, I believe, on the commercial side, long-term friend, and actually the city planning commission. You are the president of the planning commission, yes, Mr. Matt Evans, and Matt has his own commercial real estate firm, and he's just ubiquitous to everything real estate in Valparaiso. So these guys will be very knowledgeable and will be great panelists for our speaker and guests to bounce some ideas off of, to bounce some questions off of. So I said good night, or sorry, good evening, everyone. Before I introduce the speaker, and she will also be our facilitator, I'd like to offer a few brief comments to frame the challenge that is at hand. How does a city of our size spur residential development that the private market has otherwise not participated in? What is their incentive to do that with respect to the dynamics that they confront, and how do we navigate around that? This is a question that faces many cities across not just the state, but also across the nation. More and more communities have come to recognize that attainable housing is not just a social concern, it is a cornerstone of economic vitality. So when housing is out of reach, the entire local economy feels the strain. It's not necessarily apparent on those who may not be stressed for housing, but certainly a large swath of folks do sometimes feel that strain, including employers. There's a link between housing and economic growth. Affordable housing isn't a luxury, and I believe it is a necessity. When people can't find homes near their jobs, they either leave for other cities or face financial hardship or experience housing instability. This weakens our workforce, limits business expansion, and undermines long-term prosperity. Cities like Valparaiso thrive when prospective employers can count on a stable nearby workforce. Housing access is workforce development, and it is also economic development. So that's a hat that the city council wears. We do have a certain amount of authority over our economic development arm or engine, and we certainly like to see that become a prominent feature within our toolbox as it relates to incentivizing housing as an economic development feature in our city. Indiana was once a benchmark for affordability, but in the past decade, home prices have surged 90%, while wages have grown only 32%. Rents are up by a third, and we're facing a shortfall of over 100,000 housing units since 2000. And I'm not certain if that's national, but I do have my source for reference. So it's a nationwide there's one home for every 230 households. One home for every 230 households. In Indiana, there's one home for every 308 households, potential households. Low interest rates in the past have got a lot of add to the problem by locking people into low mortgages and a reluctance to move for maybe a higher interest rate and maybe a mortgage when they are currently feeling the stress of growing assessed value, higher property taxes, higher insurance. But there's the desire to move, but they are immobilized by the circumstances that create greater costs for them with a longer term mortgage or a mortgage at all at higher interest rates. To meet this challenge, both private companies and public agencies are stepping in. And we've seen that across Indiana and some of the big technology companies are actually investing serious money into funding homes for middle class families, their workforce. So there are many tools that we have, including the mayor touched on zoning and maybe some incentives with respect to the way we designate a parcel of land as an increment finance district, tax increment finance. I think for housing we call it HOTIF. You know, what I want to do is not say anything more. I'll close later, but right now, with no further ado, I'm going to say that after 2 decades of working with Indiana's second largest city as a senior executive director, I'm senior executive responsible for directing, developing, and planning the overall housing and neighborhood development strategies for the Fort Wayne area. In 2010, Presley Cowan created CED Services, an Indiana certified company owned women business enterprise, a self-described capital stacker. You'll hear that term a lot, capital stacking. That's sort of a method that I believe I've come to understand as a very solid way to not only create housing opportunity today, but rather to actually create a sustainable model whereby you might be able to expand what we've initially established by stacking the capital in such a way that you can access certain amounts of it. So certain amounts of the appreciation gap. The HOME method is a proprietary housing delivery system designed to expedite and optimize workforce housing solutions. Working with elected officials and community leaders to undertake large-scale and small-scale housing-related projects and place-making initiatives is Heather's forte. With no further ado, because again, I could probably read for another 20 minutes what's all in her pedigree, but I think she'll pretty much speak for herself with respect to her competencies. Thank you very much. Ms. Heather Presley-Cowan, thank you.
Well, I'm going to stand over here and I'll turn on this. Thank you very much for that. So we're talking tonight about housing. How many in the room, if you're a steering committee member, you're going to participate? How many in the room actually live in affordable housing? Anyone? Probably steering committee members. If you didn't raise your hand, we can safely assume that you're paying too much and you can't afford the house you live in, right? So when we talk about housing affordability, we're going to talk about housing in some certain terms, and we're going to walk through a methodology that really focuses on how we make housing affordable, which is very different than affordable housing. Just like when I ask everyone, do you live in affordable housing, and many of us go, no, I don't live in affordable housing. Why? Because my housing's not subsidized. Yeah, the stigma. I don't live in affordable housing, right? And if you do live in, we'll talk about in a minute, big A affordable housing, well, kudos. There was housing that was designed and developed for your income. The housing I chose was based on my income, but other people could also buy it too. Whereas sometimes big A affordable housing, as we talk about, is a little bit different. So as we go through tonight, this is our Ignite session. We are going to talk about a method that we're deploying here in Valparaiso under this NOAA leadership. And we're going to talk about why it's important that we think about housing a little bit differently than when we normally think about that word housing and what its implications are for a community. The methodology that we've developed over many years, back when I was with the city of Fort Wayne, we developed the first in-town neighborhood in about 75 years. It was about a mile from downtown. We were not allowed to call it downtown housing because we had not done housing inside of Fort Wayne, and the place that it was located was considered a low-income neighborhood. So when we developed that, though, what we found were there were lots of problems. And we were working with a developer out of Indianapolis who had done Fall Creek Place. If you're familiar with Indianapolis, this near downtown neighborhood, we thought we're going to be the next. And we opened that in 2007. And if you know what happened in 2007, you know what happened next. We were right on the eve of the downturn. We had this great neighborhood we were about to open, and the bottom fell out of the economy. That's what the Home Method's rooted in. This idea that our neighborhoods in downtowns, near downtowns are awesome and cool. Although back then we learned we had all this market potential. We'll talk about that in a minute. What we couldn't get over in our community was, is that really true? Does that number of people want to live here? Do they want to live in that particular neighborhood? The answer was yes, but it took us a long time to figure out, number one, did we believe it? And then second of all, could we actually achieve what we saw? And that was Fort Wayne back in 2007, and I can tell you that today we have $1 million units in downtown. Sounds familiar to places like Valparaiso. But we also have a lot of workers in downtown that are needing housing. And so when we talk about the method, we're talking about taking the community's wants, needs, and desires, which are that green circle, and then we have what developers can do. And capital stacking is not a term that I'm sure, Rick, you haven't heard 1,000 times and talked about. But when we're talking about government getting involved in housing, capital stacking and treating government resources differently is what this is all about. When a government leads housing, we think it's going to be big A affordable. In this particular case, government leading housing says we're going to treat this as an investment of our time, our talents, and our treasures. So the Home Method is all about finding out what's possible and then working with the private sector to bring it to pass so that government does what it needs to do and no more. Now, going back to that term affordable housing, when we talk about big A versus little a affordable housing, it's always the elephant in the room. And so I'm going to go through some of the terminology that we use in the Home Method that'll help us to have this conversation tonight. So when we think about big A, as we've said, this is about housing that I may not be able to live in because I make too much money or sometimes too little money. Whereas little a, affordable, just means I'm spending 30% or less of my gross monthly income on my housing. So based on that, how many people are living in affordable housing? I'm not going to ask you that. I am dead up to my ears. But the idea is that we all live in housing that we can afford. Some of the other core values, oftentimes when communities go out and do an analysis like I'm going to share with you, it becomes the best thing that sits on the shelf in the mayor's office, right? Ooh, this awesome study we did, it's beautiful, it's glossy, and what did you do with it? Well, we studied, right? So a study is something that's very different from what we did. A study looks back, and for any of you who want to take a trip somewhere, you usually are not going to drive your car looking in the rearview mirror, but when we think about what many communities do is they do a study and they do this elaborate demographic analysis of who lives here and what happened last year, and then figure out that, look, we haven't added any housing stock and we're dying, so we might as well shut our doors. A strategy, on the other hand, looks ahead and says, who do we want to be, where do we want to be, who do we need to serve in this process, and how are we going to go about doing that? It looks forward and kind of looks in a visionary way at what's possible. Now when we do that, it comes down to market potential. And I'm going to share with you the results of a market potential analysis, and I'll explain why. You'll see in the data why it's so different. But the goal is that this leads directly to implementation. So as I said, tonight is called Ignite. Our next session, spoiler alert, is about Engage, because in the Home Method, we can't take the information we're about to share tonight and do anything with it without key partners, many of whom are in the room tonight. The next is maximization versus optimization. So I've been doing this with communities for almost 10 years outside of the city. And what I can tell you is I work with a lot of small and rural communities, and I also work with a few bigger cities, but it never fails that I come into a room and say, hey, you have market potential, and some developer in the room says, I can tell you we do not need housing. And I say, why? And they say, because I've got 30 lots on the edge of town that haven't sold, and I can tell you we don't need housing. And yet all the realtors in the room are like, look, we've got a month's worth of inventory if we're lucky. Who's right? They both are. The only difference is the reason those lots aren't sold is because maximization says we need housing, let's build housing. Optimization says we need housing, how much? For whom? What can they afford? Where do they want it? Does it need to be denser, right? That developer who had the 30 lots on the edge of town thought, oh, they want half-acre lots that are, at least 4,000 square feet. And what I'll tell you is today's buyer and renter population they're not looking for that anymore. So that's why it's sitting there. And it's good to see our real estate expert nodding his head. So why is housing economic development? So who is crying out in this whole conversation around housing these days? I can say when I first thought this thought and said out loud, housing is economic development, I actually caught the attention of a lot of economic development professionals who were at that time saying, look, we're doing shovel-ready sites, we're trying to get businesses here, why would you say housing is economic development? And today it's a lot easier story. Anyone do economic development here? Okay, let me tell you. Being able to serve employers as part of your housing program is mission critical. We're going to talk about how much of the population that needs housing in Valparaiso are actually commuting from other places, but it's significant. Having done these analyses all over the state of Indiana, I can tell you by and large, roughly 30% of any community's population are people who are driving more than 15 minutes to work. And if you're driving more than 15 minutes to work and another job comes up closer to where you live, what do? You take it, right? If I've got reduced transportation costs, I'm living better financially, but I'm also probably not going to uproot myself unless I can find the housing that is suitable that I have right now in that other community. So having employers involved in this situation becomes extremely important when we think about housing. We also talk in the home method about why housing is infrastructure. Many of you may be familiar with programs in the past where we did blight elimination. We tore down a lot of houses. Community is very proud that they went in and tore out that stock that was no longer functioning. But what do we have when we tear out housing? Empty lots. And if I'm thinking from a financial perspective, there is really good infrastructure running right past that house. And as a developer, if you've got infrastructure, you're avoiding a cost, right? You're actually able to build it more affordably. But in the case of treating housing as infrastructure, it really is saying that it's not enough just to have the water and sewer running. We actually need built units because that's where, as a community, as a government, we actually can assess taxes that actually pay for that service that we're providing to the community. So our idea here is that we do capital stacking, but we do it through looking through that lens of a market potential analysis. So this is housing that probably doesn't exist in this community yet. And density and design becomes one of our key ways for making it affordable. So to hear communities that are focused on zoning as a way to make housing more affordable, it's not just more affordable at that point, it actually is more attractive to a lot of renters and buyers, and also the idea of bulk purchasing of housing. So some communities go all the way out there. They're out there doing work. I'm going to show you one that's doing that. But at the end of the day, you walk through this process where you determine what your market potential is. You decide how the government is going to get involved in this, if it will get involved. Is it possible that some places, local governments are like, great, that's great market potential. We've got all the partners to get the work done. Let's just let them do what they do. Yes. But by and large, unlike Valparaiso, who does have a lot of work going on, There are communities who haven't seen housing in 75 years still to this day, and yet only have 30 houses on the market at any given time, countywide. So they go through a lot more of the process to get this done. Where you'll go next, we don't know. We're only in the ignite phase. But I can tell you for sure that there are 10 reasons why housing plans succeed. And without going through all of them, there are 5 that are actually highlighted, and that is leadership. Community leaders, we call it swagger, who really get market potential, know what they want, and aren't willing to settle for less, get really great results when they understand their market and start to head in that direction. And so what I would say is, not every community is even thinking about doing housing strategies in Indiana. We still have counties that are like, I'll just take whatever falls off the truck coming out of that big city next door, and that's okay. But those that are poised for growth, and actual growth means we're getting more affordable, naturally affordable housing, it's going to be led by community leaders with some swagger, who really get it. So let's talk about your results. So Zimmerman Vogt Associates is a firm that I first hired when I was at the city of Fort Wayne in 2004. And we wanted to know what was possible. There was this new kind of analysis at the time, and not many people were doing it. And what we looked at was this lens that I've shared with you about who are these people that want to live here but we can't see them. Every year their lease comes up, they're searching up other apartment complexes where? Right here in Valparaiso in this case. And every time they're searching up a house on Zillow, they're looking with those parameters of Valparaiso. Zimmerman Vogt Associates has done this all over the nation, in big cities and small. We actually are happy and proud that we brought them into a lot of the rural communities of Indiana. But this tool is critical, but it requires belief. So I'm going to walk through this. So again, we're talking about market potential, not demand. So if you wanted to use this to prove to a bank that people are going to move into your apartment complex, this is not the tool. It's potential. These are the folks that if you build it at this price point, typically in these locations, here's who will come. It's designed to put the consumer at the center of the conversation, not the housing unit itself or the developer. They have a proprietary method, but using normal resources that you and I would know about. Movement, your taxes. When you move from one house to another, you report that on your taxes. So they're using things like that to know about migration. They tell us where the market potential lives now, so where are these folks coming from, how many are likely to move to Valparaiso in this case, who are they, what are their profiles, are they empty nesters, retirees, are they young folks, millennials, what are their housing preferences, what should those rents and prices be, and then how fast, and this is really important, will those units sell or rent? So they start, as with any other analysis, with here's Valparaiso today, the snapshot for 2024, population of 35,000. Your median household income, 65,900. What was interesting to me is, in a state like Indiana, you usually see at least 60, many times 70% owner occupied. You're already very balanced. You're starting to get more rentals, balancing out in terms of your owner occupied. But then that median housing value really got me. 284,700. Does that seem about right? No. What is it? Lower?
Higher.
Higher. What is it?
330.
330. Okay, I'm going to tell you, and I'm going to work in a lot of cities and counties. That is very high. That is very high. 284,700. I can tell you in most counties, I might see 200, 225 on the high end. So you have a very high value. Going back to the Mayor's California example, how many people that sold that $4.4 million house would be upset about having had that much equity returned? I wouldn't, right? So there's a gift right there. Your house is worth more if you live in this community and you bought here a long time ago. So the draw areas. This is where we figure out, okay, where are folks coming from? So 28% of the folks who are gonna show up in the numbers I'm gonna tell you about already live here in the city. And another 13% are coming from the county. So what, 41%? Again, that's lower. Most communities, I'm about 50% coming from that county. So you've got 41% of your population that's in this analysis that want to move around. They want to move into something, let's say they want to move up, they want to grow into a bigger house, or maybe they're downsizing. Another 32% are coming from Lake Cook County, Illinois, and LaPorte County, Indiana. Right? So you've got about 30%, a little over 30% that are coming from these other counties. And when we look at Cook County, we're actually drawing from other places outside of the state. And then beyond that even, 27% are coming from the balance of the US. You don't see them, right? These are people who think Valparaiso is so attractive that they would basically leave their place in Florida, typically Florida, Texas, California, to move here. We may see them showing up. We may not. Why? When you've got a mile-long list of people who are showing up for that house that's up for sale that's gonna move really fast, that's a great way to see. If I've got a waiting list on an apartment, but what if you don't have that unit yet in your portfolio as a community? They don't show up. You don't know. And so what Zimmerman Vogt really specializes in is unpacking that for us. So how many? Every single year, 3,620 households of all incomes are swirling around, potentially looking to live in Valparaiso. Every year. You believe it? No. Yeah. Okay, well, good. So, who are these people? Well, 39% are younger singles and couples. Okay? 34% are traditional and non-traditional families. What does that tell you? 73% are millennials. Younger millennials, older millennials, but. And then another 27% are those empty nesters and retirees. Anything surprise you? We're going to let the panelists actually react to this in a few minutes, but this is exactly what you expected to see. Lots of people moving around, looking here every time their lease comes up. So what do these folks want? 49% of them want apartments, which I would say is a little higher than what I normally see. Why might 49% want apartments? University, okay. What else? Maybe they can't afford a house. Interest rates are too high.
Down payments.
I'm sorry?
Down payments.
Down payment. Some can't find a down payment.
Younger families that aren't ready to make a permanent situation.
Thank you. That's a really big one here. I live in Cook County, Illinois. I'm a doctor or a university professor. I've got a lot of resources, got some college debt, but I'm going to try before I buy, right? So I want to rent. A lot of try before we buy in this when you see so many people coming from outside of Valparaiso and even outside of Indiana. So yes, we got lots of reasons. Millennials, no cash. I've got college debt, I've got great incomes, great credit scores, but no cash. So down payment becomes the issue. So 49% want rentals, and the other 51% want a combination of detached houses and then density. And what does density represent? Like the mayor said, affordability, right? If we can offer more density, we naturally start creating more affordability. So how much can these folks afford to pay? So we have to go to HUD when we start talking about affordability. This is the HUD guideline on what someone in Porter County makes and where they fall in the income spectrum. And I'm going to focus, for the sake of this conversation, on, let's say, a 4-person household. So a 4-person household that makes $48,650 a year as the household income is considered 60% of area median income. There was a day when I would say in Fort Wayne, if you make 60% of area median income, you can afford to rent anywhere you want to in Fort Wayne. Is that true today? No, definitely not. Not in most communities. But 60% of area median income, 4 people. These aren't indigent, these are people who have a job. Maybe 1 person working, a couple of kids, right? 1 staying home. That same 4-person household that makes $64,900 is still below the area median income for this county. They're at 80% of area median income. And then finally, 100% of area median income, a 4-person household making $76,500 is considered 100%. They're right at that area median income. Okay? So why would we care about incomes if we're talking about housing? This is based on the consumer. And so what I'm going to share with you is based on the folks that want to live here, how much they earn, and then taking 30% of their gross monthly income and saying how much would that rent, should that rent be that they can afford? I know they said there would be no math, right? So when we talk about market rate rentals, we're going to talk about workforce attainable and affordable. Those are the 60 to 80% AMI folks. And then market rate are the 80% AMI and up. Okay, so when I use those terms, that's what we mean. These are affordable to those groups. So for rent ranges, every year there's a potential 1,771 renters who are looking around for rentals with incomes at or above 60% of AMI. And these are the rent ranges they're looking for. So we need about 15% in that $750 to $1,250 range. What would you say our current rent range is in terms of what's the average rental going for in Valparaiso today?
Anywhere from 1,400 to 2,200.
1,400 to 2,200. Agreed? Okay. So we've got about 15% of these folks that live here, typically, that are in that $750 to $1,250 range. What would we call that when we look at housing? They're below your median rent range. They're going to be subsidized in some way. Why? Because in order to make that unit that's could earn $1,400 a month in the $750 to $1,250 range, you're going to have to subsidize it. What about that $1,250 to $1,750 range? Probably right in there, right? That's what we're hearing. $1,750 to $2,250, right? So we're looking at what? 15, 35, 34, 61%, is that right? 61% are at $2,250 and below. And the remainder is at $2,250 and even $2,750 and up. Now, most communities I talk to, they have a $1,400 month rent, and they need to get to $2,000 a month, and they're shocked. No one's going to pay that here. Here, we have something a little bit different. You have a lot of high-end housing coming in, and maybe it's the other end that's actually in need, right? But the idea is you've got market potential in all of those rent ranges. And the hope is that you've got an entire spectrum of partners that are producing that housing because it's all part of the potential. So for condo buyers, again, we have 168 annual buyers who are looking to live here, and you have a breakdown of anywhere from $100,000 to $175,000. Now, normally I would say, I'm hoping that house on the street, that if a new unit comes in, that house on the street's going to become available, and that's going to be more affordable. But what's your median value here? $300. We're not opening anything up that's more affordable. So again, you've got this whole range, everything from $100,000 all the way down to $475 and up. And so you've got an entire range of folks that are going to need housing in those price ranges.
So what you're saying is very elusive to me.
Yeah.
It's called too much information.
Yes, too much.
Unless you're a realtor. What's the connection between talking about what's affordable in renting and what's affordable in buying?
We're talking about people. And so if I were to take you through, and I can, right, okay, let's leave these alone. I'll go to some slides that actually combine it for you. Here's what we need to be building. If we're going to add and address the market potential in Valparaiso for the workforce affordable, what's workforce affordable? This is not considered the big A affordable low income housing, right? We started at 60% of area median income.
Why? Why are you choosing that? In doing so, you're leaving out working poor. In Valpo,
Yeah.
the average person working in retail makes $13 an hour. Our EMT makes 20 or less. An instructional aide at the high school, $13. Cafeteria aides, 10. Is that not work? Are they not workers, and is that not workforce?
They're
housing?
considered workforce.
Why are we leaving behind those folks?
They're not left behind. This is not considered subsidized. So going back to the conversation before, we're gonna have to subsidize the housing. These are folks that, if we wanna serve the 60 to 80% of area median income, the working population, and that's an hourly wage. That's not a household income. So if I had a couple of those in the house, it might be different. And that's what they looked at. They looked at IRS data and several other pieces of data to say, based on this population that we're talking about here, this is what we're looking at for workforce attainable and affordable. Are there needs in the 0 to 60% of area median income? Yes, that shows up in the analysis. So it's all part of the analysis.
But why are we not addressing that with what's being proposed here?
You will as part of the implementation. So each partner here is looking at a different slice of this, is how I would put it. So if you look at what your rent ranges should be for the people who want to move to and around, $800 to $1,500 a month should be your multifamily rents. What I heard is our rents here are at $1,400 to $2,200 a month. We're talking about that population.
So we're facing a housing situation where we do not have enough affordable housing or enough affordable renting.
Yep. And we've got a lot of people moving around. So if we look at those rent ranges that we need to be in for workforce attainable and affordable, $800 to $1,500. And then you've got incomes between 80% and 120%. So now we're getting into market rate, $1,100 to $2,300. And then even above 120, $1,900 to $2,900. We have all forms of housing with all layers of capital needing to be involved, right? If I can afford an $800 a month rent, how much am I making per year? Anyone have their calculator? So we want $800 to be 30% of their gross monthly income. So let's just say $2,400 a month times 12. Anyone? 30,000? 32? So we're talking about a household that makes $32,000 a year, not much higher than that $13 a month, or $13 an hour job you just talked about. So $800 a month, it's about $32,000 a year.
You'll find that.
All of this is available on the website, and I'll give you that in just a moment. But the point here is, we have lots of housing need, and we've got lots of price points to hit. And the folks here, again, I want everyone to see the information. We don't have to pour over it, but my point is, there's a whole range of housing price points and production levels that we're going to need to hit. So, if we're going to build multifamily, market rate, affordable, 60 to 80%, we need condos starting at 105. Do we have anything like that? Right. We also need condos and townhomes in that $275,000 to almost $400,000 range. And then when we get to the traditional single-family detached that we've seen in Indiana, we go everywhere from 220 all the way to 475. Lots of housing. Now, I said there were 3,600 households every year looking around. So when we think about 3,600 households looking around every year, does that mean that they're all gonna buy here? No. The market capture annually is, for rentals, about 20 to 25%. That's what Zimmerman Book uses, and actually I've seen it, it's very conservative is what I would say. Condos, townhomes, and detached houses, so all the home ownership, 10 to 15% of whatever that number is what they're suggesting is the capture rate. So what do we actually need to produce over the next 5 years? 314 to 424 units per year over the next 5 years if we're going to keep up with our market potential. Thoughts? Comments? Yeah.
So you talked about the number, a little over 3,000, 3,600 are looking to possibly move here, and then a percentage of that actually would if there was housing. We also know people leave, they pass away, right, all of that. So what about the exiting population? And that number, is that already calculating the average amount of people who are vacating their homes in this area?
Yeah, it does. It takes in quite a bit of information, but the important part of it is they're looking at the folks who want to live or move to and around Valparaiso. Right? Yes, thank you.
Does that take, piggybacking on that, does that take into account the number of folks who are stuck where they are and are not going to be moving as in former years?
So you're saying, I want to move and can't. That's this
Or
group.
can't downsize or whatever. Is that taking them into account as well, since that's a shifting number now?
Are you, okay, I don't wanna misunderstand your question. They're saying, we need 314 to 424 units every year because that group exists and can't move.
So they are taking that.
Yeah, I need to move out of this apartment and I can't.
Or I need to move out of this big house and I want to downsize.
That's-
gotta
and I
let it go.
agree.
That's for what I'm referring to. We
Spot
have
on.
an aging population that's stuck.
Yep.
So
That's
they
this.
are taking them into account, that those are not opening up.
Yes, not only opening up, but going back to, I think someone said earlier, I'm going to pay more for this next house that's smaller than the house I'm in and what I paid for it 40 years ago, and I just can't wrap my brain around that. And I'm on fixed income, let's say. So we're gonna actually do an exercise in a little bit that's gonna let us process through this, because every one of these situations needs its own strategy. When we actually get to the person who shows up at the door and wants to buy the house, or if we have lenders in the room, any lenders? Okay, well, we need more lenders involved. Banks and lenders are a huge part of this on both sides of the equation, but I can tell you that if my income doesn't allow me to downsize, I'm staying in that house. Now, that's just how it is. And so the idea of looking at each of those profiles that we'll show you in just a moment, is all about figuring out how we're going to produce 424 units per year over the next 5 years, through what partners, in what locations, serving what buyers and what renters is the question. And that's the great thing about where you're at is, to the extent that this doesn't become a shelvable document, you actually have some opportunities to solve real problems here. And every community is different. So, over the next 5 years, we need close to 2,000 units. That's conservatively.
Excuse me. You had said earlier, people looking at in or around Valpo.
Yeah.
How far out from the city was this study done?
That's actually, they want to move to and around Valparaiso. It's Valparaiso. It's a good question. It's not even San Porter County. It's Valparaiso.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Oh, I was just wondering about environmental effects of how the town changes when there's more density, like we don't have a grocery store downtown, for example, or would it mean less parks, or does it does it mean that the city has to really expand, in order to have that additional housing? What sort of, quality of life or feeling like you're, in an environmentally healthy city?
I hear exactly what you're saying. You're like, where are we gonna put all this housing? And yeah, that's a natural question to have. You know, I'm driving through this downtown. If I moved here, I wanna be as close to this as possible, right? I wanna be walkable, I wanna be bikeable. Some people don't. Some others are gonna maybe want a little bit more space. That's where this group comes in. And I'm so excited to get their reactions because I'm certain there are many projects in the pipeline already, but there are also projects that maybe need to be in the pipeline that aren't. And so as a community, we take this information and we say just exactly, how do we protect and preserve the things we love the most? That's where zoning comes in, right? We want to make sure that what we do is healthy for everyone, and it also invites our kids to come back home if they want to, right? Or for me to live in a house that's more accessible if I want to stay here and grow and thrive. So how that happens is all in the control of this community and the partners that are sitting here. So, Jen, can I get a time check? I got 6 minutes. So I'm going to walk you through some communities that have done just what I just described. So we took this theory, the home method, and we took it to Northeast Indiana, where I'm from, right? And so we created a learning lab there, and today, that learning lab has over 800 units in housing development in various phases. We also have another learning lab, actually it's more of, it's an advanced learning lab down in the 7-county area around Indianapolis and Terre Haute. But the idea was that we learned we needed 15,000 housing units outside of the big city and the big county of Allen back in 2019. And we looked up 5 years later and we asked ourselves, okay, we needed 15,000 housing units. We had produced 5. We needed 36% rental and 64% home ownership, and we had produced 6% rental, and the rest was home ownership. So we fell woefully short, and why do we need more rental? What's going to be the most affordable unit that's on the street? You don't even have to use tax credits. It's going to be rental, because it's dense. And so we looked at this, and we said, okay, we're going to go out to these counties and these communities, and we're going to work with them to put together housing strategies. And we rolled out a planner on demand service. We rolled out a Hoosier Homes initiative for down payment assistance that serves buyers up to 140% of area median income. You saw the incomes, so going way up there above the median. We also started to cultivate and are starting to cultivate more nonprofit partners, economic development organizations primarily throughout the region who want to spur more housing development in their communities. Why would that be important? Because if we want to have more say in what we're doing, we need to partner with the local governments, and the local governments need to be our lead investors oftentimes in helping to figure out where that needs to happen and then facilitating what we want to happen next. And as a result, we've had lots of resources come into those, and I'll just share with one specific example. City of Wabash, how many are familiar with Wabash, Indiana? Oh, good, a lot of people. It's a beautiful, beautiful city. But hadn't had no development, has had no development in many, many, many years, generations, right? Despite the fact they've got this awesome downtown. And Mayor Long there said, hey, look, I want to try this thing. I want to try this method that you're using, and I want to do something here. Parkview Hospital has gifted us with a large piece of land, 14 acres, right walkable to downtown. It was the site of the former hospital. But the question was, what's going on that would mean, when we know we've got market potential, we figured out they needed 500 units over 5 years, and we learned it wasn't happening. The private sector was not doing it. So we looked at it and figured out, well, it cost us $300,000 to construct it, but it's only got a $250,000 market value. How many developers are going to lose $50,000 every time they do a project? None. So we have a capital stacking method we used with them, and Legacy Heights came into view. $15,000 total investment. Like I said, it's walkable to downtown, so what we did was we densified it so that we could get the infrastructure costs down, because the mayor was putting the bill for that. And we put 44 units that really look like the neighborhood around it in that walkable location to downtown, and really helped the community to wrap their hearts and minds around what we wanted to see there. And as a result, what does that do? It sets the stage for allowing others to do the same thing. Now, in this case, Wabash needed more expensive housing. But even if we're trying to build less expensive housing, we need to build it very affordably. So testing with the method, the home method is saying, how do we invest in where we're trying to go so that we can show the private sector how to do it in a very de-risked way? And that's what we did here. So we took this piece of land that was gifted to us. The mayor established a residential TIF. Soon enough, READY came out. We went ahead and used the READY to actually do the infrastructure program so he could use this TIF where? On the 5 other projects he has in his pipeline. We implemented and used a lot of money to do that project, but at the end of the day, we were able to actually allow those READY funds to spur new opportunities in the community. And today, we had our first 5 units that are coming out. Now, that being said, it was all about empowering the market. It was about telling the development community and the banks and lenders and the realtors and even those buyers that we're going to remove barriers for you. And that's what the home method's all about. And to the extent that we take next steps here, that's what I would recommend that we do. So with that, I'm going to turn to our illustrious panel. So everyone's been sort of introduced here. I have a few questions, and hopefully this feeding you with a fire hose approach left you with some ideas and thoughts. But we're going to start here with you, Matt. So based on what you've just heard about Valparaiso's housing market potential, what stood out the most to you, and maybe what was missing?
Yeah, well, I do have a little more background that I should mention too, because I'm in residential and commercial real estate. I'm also, as mentioned, president of the Planning Commission. But we look at things pretty deeply in the MLS too as a real estate agent. I'm also here to represent Paradise Community Homes, which is trying to build attainable housing in Belleville as well. So I'm on the board for Paradise. So it's great to see everybody here in support of affordable housing. I just want to mention that. So your visit here today and your interest in this really excites all of us, I'm sure. But what I want to mention is that in tracking the MLS data, we noticed that unit sales and even detached homes is pretty much level in the city of Valparaiso. If you draw a trend line across the last 10 years, there haven't been more unit sales, right? Which is very interesting because we've got more people moving here, we've got more demand, but we just can't get that supply. And the supply is tight because of many reasons. The other thing I noticed was that the average single family home has gone up in price 191% over the last 10 years. So that data is staggering. One other thing we gleaned from the data is that in the same 10-year period, the amount of homes, single family in Valparaiso with Valparaiso addresses, so this is beyond Center Township, under 250 has gone from 70% of our housing market to about 20% of our housing market. So that's a sign where you haven't seen, the growth in median income in homes. That's why we're having such a hard time with housing. It's not only here in Belleville, it's across the state, it's across the region, it's across the country. So those are some things that really stood out for me, and we are truly handcuffed due to the lack of supply, right? If we had more homes, I'm sure that we could sell them, because we don't see any builders building basically under 350,000 right now. Olthoff is going to bring some new product up locally here in that market, and that's going to be great to see because that hasn't been done in the past. So those are some of the things that I see on the street and dealing with buyers all the time and sellers. Yeah.
Good evening, everyone. Nothing surprised me, I wouldn't say. I think it's things that we've seen kind of nationwide and also across Northwest Indiana, looking at studies or other things like that. I think the piece that what is really good to kind of frame this conversation is, looking at the housing supply overall, right? So I think that's something that gets lost, right? That we always talk about either just affordable or just kind of looking at people who need kind of higher end stuff, but not looking at the continuum of housing needs. And that knowing if we build a lot of different types of housing, that helps the entire spectrum of people from the lowest income to the highest income, and helps drive down prices overall, right? So, and I think the thing that the study or strategy pointed out really well is how Valparaiso and Porter County is a little bit different than some of our neighbors and some other communities that we work in and other people work in as well. Is we don't have a huge amount of vacant, blighted houses or infill lots that we can use. And same thing with our housing prices, right? Like if we build a house for $300,000, we're not going to have an appraisal gap down to $250,000, right? Because we can sell it for probably more than that, right? Which is kind of where our issue comes in. So I'm really excited to talk about how we address those issues, and I think you should really set the stage for that. So,
I'm not currently active in the Valparaiso housing market, but I've lived here for 31 years, and anecdotally speaking, I'm really surprised at how prices have risen in this community. When I moved here, it was very affordable, and during the last 5 years, I've been surprised at the prices I've seen. I was speaking with someone the other day about the price he sold his home for, and he put it $25,000 over where the realtor suggested, and he got multiple offers and sold it for $14,000 over the list price within a week. The other thing that I've noticed is just driving through the neighborhoods that the homes that I see in the new communities here in Valparaiso are smaller than they were back in the 1990s. The houses are obviously smaller because of affordability. And I don't see anything that seemingly is below $350,000 at all.
Stark, right?
So I'll agree with, we have a housing shortage, availability, people aren't moving. My team and I as realtors, we operate from the border of Illinois all the way to South Haven, Michigan. We cover about 7 counties with the team. So if I get a listing at Valparaiso, I love it. I know I listed, I know it's going to sell, and there's going to be a buyer for it. As it pertains to what we're trying to do here, I think the issue, and I wish we had a lender on the panel, because as I'm looking at the data and the reports that put out, none of this factors in any debt that people may hold. And so this is just their gross income. Now, I had a conversation with a lender on the way, just for an example, there's a company lists beautiful 2-bed, 2-bath townhomes, 1,200 square foot. That alone is $324 square foot. They're selling quickly. So that's a medium price, and really from what's being built now, probably a medium to lower medium price home in Valparaiso. Well, conventional loan requirements, 50% debt to income. FHA is a little more favorable, but the difficulty in what I see of what you want to build at certain price points, that's factoring gross income. It doesn't take into account debt. Everyone's got a car loan, everyone's got a couple car loans, student loan debt, especially if they're moving into a $300,000 plus house in Valparaiso. And so, one, I think the reason a lot of people rent is, doesn't matter what grants you put out there, you're not going to escape Fannie and Freddie underwriting regulations. So, people may want the house, and you may have it for them, but at each income level, to 60 to 100%, 20 percentile, they have to qualify. And what this report shows, I feel that people at the 120 percentile, what they qualify for a purchase is actually a little bit less. That $400,000 house, for example, that mortgage, now a new home, this is the difficult thing about a new construction home, the lender looks at it as 1% of assessment. So if it's a $400,000 house, you can assume your taxes are $4,000 a year. Used house, it's whatever the assessed value currently is. So a $400,000 house, you need to make that payment, is $3,136 a month. You need to make at least, with zero debt, just over $75,000 a year. And you could say a house of 4, but you can't just everybody pitch in and qualify for a loan with 4 people. It's typically 1, they'll take the lesser of the credit. So I think what it's going to come down to is people's financial ability to obtain a house that you put out. And rents are successful because there's less underwriting for them.
Well, I can't keep up with your numbers, I'm sorry on that. So I'm the one person on the panel who has nothing to do with the real estate market. But I work with the United Way, and for the last several years, we focused our efforts on serving the hardworking families of the region, those that are struggling just to get by. We use an acronym called ALICE. It stands for Asset Limited, Income Constrained, but Employed. And all our work, really specifically over the last 3 years regionally, and going back about 10 years looking at Lake County, has centered on working with that population. And when we talk about that population, numbers-wise, using acronyms, it's one thing, but really bringing it home, a single family, a single person in Porter County needs to make almost $15 an hour, $30,000 a year, just to get by, to have a sustainable life. A family of 4 with young children needs to make $80,000. Now, when we talked about numbers early on, we're talking about $80,000 households and being able to afford rent. What I can tell you in our work, they're struggling. At $80,000, if you lose a wheel on your car, that may set you back in ways that you're going to struggle for the next month, or maybe the next year, trying to overcome. We have programs that are designed to help families like that get the skills, get the credentials they need to get better jobs. We also do financial wellness programs. We do first-time homebuyer programs. I can tell you, everyone we work with has one dream, and that's to own a home. But for most of them, it's a big step from where we're at now to where we want to be. I can tell you, the important thing, as we talk about that population, in Porter County, it's 36% of our population makes below the ALICE threshold. 10% are below the poverty level, which is very good compared to the state level, which is 14%. But that next 26%, those are the folks we see every day. They want to live here, they're part of this community, but they're getting squeezed out because they just can't afford to live here.
This would be for a realtor. Are you having a hard time selling homes, or are you getting basically what you're asking for the home, so that it's going to be hard to deal with it if you're getting what is already not affordable, but for a lot of people, but we have these people coming in who can't afford them. So what's the situation there?
Listings are still selling quickly. About 18 months ago, 24 months ago, the interest rates went up, as everybody noticed. So pricing is a little more critical, and properties still have to appraise. If they get financed, they have to appraise, and they are appraising. But so long as properties are priced appropriately, they're selling quickly. And I can testify to what you said. It's typically, if it's not someone local that can afford it, somebody will come in and they will afford it. And the seller's going to sell to whomever gives them the most.
And I'll say that buyer demand is softened by the higher interest rates. We just saw it tick up to 7% again. Be a whole different world if we hit 5% again on interest rates. It's a little bit of a mental barrier, I think, with some, but it's also an affordability barrier with a lot, and that's really hurt. But also, probably over the last several months, due to the unrest in the international economy and national economy, I think that people shelved large expenditures for a little while, so it's a little hard for us to read right now. But we were hit with the same thing last year where interest rates ticked up in the spring market, and that slowed things down a little bit. So I would say buyer demand is soft, but if the home is priced right and move-in ready, it will sell right away in Belleville. No doubt about it.
I have 2 quick statistical questions, and keep in mind I did not do well in my stats class in college. So I understand why you use AMI. I know that that's kind of a HUD baseline. but isn't it fair to say that as higher income households move into the community, they pull the AMI upward? And if that is in fact the case, we know, at least anecdotally, we have had a large number of high income earners move into Valpo. So I'm concerned that, again, the focus of 60 to 120% AMI, it concerns me because it does leave behind other people. But more importantly, if it's not artificially, but if those high income earners are dragging it up, shouldn't we be looking at household income distribution? And maybe you have, and maybe it's not represented in the data. That seems important. The other question, just to put out, I understand the notion of market potential, but we have to remember we have to focus on the people who are already here. The Valpo's resident housing statistical expert, so to speak, told me at a meeting 2 nights ago, the last report he saw, we were 800 units short in terms of affordable housing for lower income families. I suspect that did not include the 240 units of affordable housing, affordable apartments that Gulfview took off the market. And my guess is it doesn't factor in the people being evicted right across the street so that this can be turned into Airbnbs. My point is I appreciate everything you're offering, and at first blush it seems powerful, but it seems to me it's too narrow of a focus. It's leaving too many people behind. And I think we need to look more deeply and more broadly at the data and the people who are most negatively impacted by housing cost burdens, and that's people certainly below 60% AMI.
I like that. I like that you're thinking in terms of, we're thinking of the entire spectrum, which is, I want to talk about that first. We'll talk about that first. Right after, what causes the upward pressure on the price points? Let's talk about economics. Supply and demand, right? It's simple supply and demand. And so to the point that we're talking about adding more stock, who in here does LIHTC, low income housing tax credits developments? I mean, I'm gonna think about, thank you, Jordan. Thank you. So I want to talk, any other entities in this community that are doing LIHTC deals here? Okay, Jordan, you're it. So when we think about hitting the lowest of the low incomes in the community, and we're talking the housed populations, we're not talking mental illness, okay? How easy is it for you to go get those LIHTC dollars to bring into the community? How many deals can you do a year?
A year, less than one. So, I think we're doing maybe one every 3 years if on a good cycle for sure. Closer to one every 5. Just they're so competitive that's the struggle, right? In the affordable housing space is the resources are slim, super competitive. I think across the entire state of Indiana, they have like 60 applications a year for LIHTC. Again, for all 92 counties, they fund like 16. So you got to have the right deal in place. You got to have the right opportunity. You got to get lucky in the scoring and how it all works at the state level.
So if we need 300 to 400 units per year, and we want to address the 800, let's say 1,000 units, in addition to that we're short, how many would one LIHTC deal get you?
50 to 75, again, on a good deal.
So when we think about this, because I think what you're saying is dead on, when we look at the market potential that's highlighted, those higher incomes, how much more likely are we able to increase supply by addressing some of those issues to address the supply and demand? Knowing that we're going to get 50 to 75 units on a good year, and let's say that's every other year, so 25 to 50 units per year out of the low-income housing tax credit program. This is the crux. What other resources do we have in the community to address that?
I think there are. I mean, our city has subsidized high-cost, high-end housing. They've not done that for lower cost and affordable housing. So again, I'm just suggesting that beyond this, we need to be more expansive, since this is a city council-led initiative, and their charge is policy. And I've seen no indication that we're looking at policy that the city government can take steps on, and I'm afraid it gets lost when we've got Paradise Homes and whatever this may become, both which may be beneficial, but it's sucking the oxygen out of the air on a conversation that needs to be much broader, much deeper, much more comprehensive.
So Jordan, not to put you on the spot, but if you had, and I'm gonna ask every panelist this, if you had your dream situation, what would happen? How would it come off to address the populations that you target? If you could start with, here's who we target.
Yeah, so we kind of specialize in the 60% and below population. So I looked at some numbers this morning to be prepared. And you know, the average income for one of our renters in Valparaiso only, our Valparaiso rentals, is about $22,000 a year gross annual income, right? So again, a lot different than those kind of 80 to 120% AMIs that were kind of in that middle zone there. So for us, again, I've been doing this a long time, over a decade. I've worked with a lot of people across the state. Like, we have a portion that we can do, and we can be steady, and we can do that across our footprint. But we can't build 900 apartments in a 5-year period, right? Like, we know that because we don't have both the capacity and the funding available through current mechanisms to make that happen. There's also, again, a lot of other issues that make building that many units in a short amount of time problematic for folks, not just on the affordable side. So for us, we look at 3 approaches, and I think this is where, I've been having a lot of conversations across Northwest Indiana about how we can make these changes. Is one, it's doing affordable housing projects like we do, right? And referencing the people that Chris talked about in the Alice population. So again, having that slice that's dedicated and it's a priority for communities is still super important. Like, that doesn't change for me. And again, we're still doing that work every day. But it's also partnering with other market rate or for-profit developers and other potential partners to fill in some of that gap incrementally as we go, right? Like, my dream would be having, again, if someone's gonna build a 150 unit apartment complex, we slice out some of those for people at certain income ranges and doing that, right? And be creative around how we're doing that, but intentionally be creative around how we do that. And again, I think there's a lot of great examples across the state and across the country of people doing that really well and getting it right. There's a lot of great examples of people not doing it well too, so I think here in Valparaiso we want to get it right. And then again, building housing at all income levels makes it better for people at lower income levels to afford housing. So right now, again, we're working every day to house people from, might be from homelessness, might be just people who are struggling in their current housing, and they're competing for the same rentals as someone making $250,000 a year, and they're only making $20,000 a year, right? Like, that is a supply problem. And so if we build more housing that people who are making $80,000, $250,000 can afford, they will buy that or buy those rentals and not go to the ones that are more on the affordable side. So if you're not looking at housing as a spectrum, then you're kind of missing the boat on how you make a system work. And so that's where we look at it from, the nonprofit side and the affordable housing side.
Matt, Paradise Homes.
Sure.
You've got the rest of these covered though.
Oh no, we need more partners. So at Paradise Community Homes, our target is to build homes in the area of 250,000 to 300,000, which again, keep in mind, is unheard of in our market. It's going to take a lot of partners. It's going to take suppliers who give discounts. It's going to take builders who cut profits or give up most of their profit altogether. It's going to take land that's cheap, land that's unused, land that's infill, that nobody else wants perhaps. So, and it's going to take infrastructure, and to me, maybe that's where we can get some state grant funding and other things to bring in the infrastructure we need, because and talking to some excavators in the last few days, when you hear it's $600 to $800 a foot to build a city street, that's a lot of money. That's $240,000 for basically one half of a city block, one street. You're not getting the alley, and you're not getting the other 3 streets you need to form that block. So it's expensive to build and develop, and we're trying to soften the burden by finding builders. So our goal is to create these lots and to bring in builders that want to do this. And we've identified several partners already that are on board and ready to go. Our first project's on Kinsey Street, and we will continue to do more and more housing and securing the lots. I don't wanna get too deep into the weeds here, but that's kind of our goal, is to provide that housing. I guess you'd say probably 25% below what it would be on the open market. And I wanna make sure, because I think it's been the biggest thing that's been missing from builders, right? Because builders don't make as much profit when they build the cheap homes, right? They'd rather make $100,000 by building a $600,000 home. And that's just the reality, because they have a lot of risk to bear, and they have a lot of people to employ, and they have high costs as well. But we need to attract the people who want to get back to our community and build these homes. They might be 800 square foot homes. They might be 1,200 square foot homes. But if you drive up and down Washington Street and Lafayette Street and Napoleon Street, that's exactly what you see on every corner, is a half lot with a tiny home on it. And they work. Some of them have basements, some don't. So as long as we can keep the architectural character and the character of Valparaiso, and they're attractive homes and they don't infringe upon others, I think it's a great way to do it. So.
We have a lot of capacity here, a lot of hope. Rick, any chance you would come back in and do 180 to $250,000 units for us?
I would consider doing it for sure. As Matt was mentioning, though, the financial obstacles are pretty significant. I think the biggest hurdle as of late is inflation. So dealing with the increased costs is very, very difficult. I know in some of our properties that we own and manage, just getting an HVAC technician out to look at some work that we need in one of our systems is $175 an hour. It's amazing how much it is these days. But I have been interested in learning more about modular housing and seeing if by chance that might be a solution to the problems that we have, where housing is made on a mass scale in a factory. About 15 years ago, I was involved in a housing project, a condominium project in the city, and I took a close look at modular. At that point, it hadn't developed to the point where it was a realistic option. But here, 15 years later, I think it is more realistic. And so I think that's something that I would definitely investigate. And interestingly, too, one more thing, I saw a public offering is out there for a company called Boxable, B-O-X-A-B-L, and it literally comes out, and it's a box that unfolds, and they're out of California, and it's an amazing concept, but some of these homes are selling for $100,000, and they look nice. Could be the wave of the future.
And to say something real quick, since you brought up the modular, I actually recently was on a webinar with 3 modular manufacturing companies that say the average cost is about 1/3 of built on site. And this is through the Mortgage Bankers Association that I was on this webinar. So it's definitely something that should be looked at.
And the tolerances are smaller
Yes.
on the manufactured than on stick-built.
Yeah, I think that's where, in my experience, in talking to a few groups and getting to see a couple projects up close, it doesn't actually cost less. You just save money because it costs so much less time. So you're saving on the time factor, which is development time is cost saving. So I think that's an important distinction in terms of like not paying more for the sticks and bricks, but you're saving more interest in those things that you can sell the unit faster or lease it up faster, so you're recouping those costs quicker.
I can say I had a meeting yesterday through our learning lab with our 800 units. We said, look, tell us, well, first we looked at, it is modular. And I grew up in Woodburn, Indiana, in a trailer. So I thought, there's no way we're gonna put trailers inside these communities. And I looked and you can't tell the difference between a modular unit today. And so that was what was really cool, was my eye was attracted to that point. But we were able to get 150 a square foot. And I've not seen that anywhere. And I still think that's high, because I remember the days when it was 75 a square foot. But, you know, I think through volume discounts and things like that, we can just keep pushing that down through that industry. That's awesome. Okay, Zane, your perfect world. You want to sell the big, expensive units, of course, because that's less work for higher money if you have an expensive unit. In the real estate world, though, from your perspective, if you had your dream for this community, what would that look like, and what would we do going forward from here that would really make that a reality?
think what's really critical is you don't want to build an affordable house now at 25% less market rate and then have someone resell it at market rate. And it's a one and done, and that's the end of it. So I don't think, I like the idea of withholding a portion of a rental complex for lower income or subsidized housing. That makes sense because it stays with the property, it could be deeded with the property. But having some sort of, you could call it a slush fund for the community to grant money. So every time someone goes to buy a home, if they want home ownership, that's always there. Because as soon as you build a community and 5, 6, 7 years later, when these people are fully vested, they can get all their grant back, they're going to sell it at market value. And now it's no longer affordable, and we're in the same boat. And so there needs to be something rolling, something ongoing. And I would love that for buyers in the group we're talking about. They just need help with financing. They need help with getting approval to buy a home. And down payment assistance, that'll help offset their debt to income, help price the home. That would be helpful. That'd be amazing.
Thank you. That's exactly what it is.
As mentioned, Heather, I'd like to respond to that concern. You bring up good concern. We talked about it a lot at Paradise Homes. So what we do is we put a deed restriction on the home, and we have a recapture fee for many years. So that if somebody does need to sell that home, because people need to sell for various reasons, we can't, first of all, let them profit take, and as you mentioned, profit from buying a low-priced home. So we recapture some of that money back into the organization. We can put it back into other homes. But we have to allow people to move freely about the country if that situation occurs. So, good question. I just wanted to point that out.
If I may ask, is Paradise Homes, is it a non-for-profit, kind of like Meridian Woods? The non-for-profit owns the house in essence?
No, we actually will not maintain ownership of the home. We will just have a deed restriction on it to recapture that money if needed.
Okay. It seems like maybe that kind of ownership would solve some of the potential problems with future owners of that non-for-profit, or if that non-for-profit didn't exist. But that maybe is just a state thing where that's run through the state and their permissions with ownership as a non-for-profit.
That's a good question. The durability of the organization is important to monitor that over the years, so we have to see that it carries forward and takes care of that and recaptures that money.
The other thing I'm really glad to hear you bring up the modular or even the mobile, which are not really mobile homes anymore, because not so much in city limits, so there's only one that I know of. There are others in the outlying areas that it does give a little more sense of pride, perhaps, to having your own 4 walls and windows than a multifamily, instead of, going up and just creating high density, or maybe putting brick on it so it looks pretty. And then I also think that Valparaiso, with its very fortuitous economic development funding, that it should want to create something independent for the non-for-profits. To be able to take some of the burden off the people that are maybe doing it as a living, where, there are people that would maybe go to work for one of the builders doing this at $10 an hour just to do it, but there are a lot of people that they still are of working age and need to feed their families, and maybe that's not realistic, but perhaps that helps take the burden off the builders, who realistically still have to operate a business and can't expect everybody to come work 40 hours a week for free indefinitely. So anyway, those are just my 2 comments. I'm very glad. The other question I had, Matt, that maybe you might know the answer to, of the 1,500 or 2,200 60% units over 5 years, like, is that, how many new construction homes have been built in a 5-year period in the zip code 4638385?
Yeah, that's a good point. I wasn't able, if I guess, follow up since you asked me. I don't have the latest building permit reports, but the city of Valparaiso does. I tracked it last through a couple of years ago, and the building permit, I think it's in this other booklet here. They haven't risen a lot, Bob. Have you tracked them lately? Okay. So through 2022, you saw an average for the last 5 years of about 940 permits a year. It did spike in 2020 with 1,300 permits that year, COVID year, right? So things really took off, there was more demand for housing, a lot more people moving out from the inner city, if you hear, from Chicago and elsewhere. So there's that.
I was just curious what percentage.
Yeah, and I don't know what percent, yeah.
It seems like perhaps a reasonable amount, maybe not the 400 a year, but I'm sure the sites of 300 per year is not.
Well, up to about, what, probably 4 or 5 years ago, we were still seeing homes, single-family ranches being built for about 325. Now that number's about 425.
Okay, we're going, yes,
I was just gonna say, of those permits that were issued, what's the price range? Because I think, just from my perspective, we're really good in this city with building high-end housing. That's an area that we don't need an excess, which I think is where, if you were to analyze the number of building permits by price of home, you would see that it's lopsided, right? We have most of it at that higher end level. What we're missing is the middle.
I think that's an excellent point. If the price points are high enough for the private sector to come in and do it, there may not be need for incentives. I hear that. That's good stuff. This is all policy discussion we're having. Okay, one more question, then I'm going to ask Chris's dream.
All right.
I just want to clarify the permit numbers. I'm not sure if Matt was looking at permits just in general, but according to the Fed, the FRED number, the Census Bureau number for Porter County, private housing structure authorized by building permits, these are new construction homes. We had about 1,200 from 1990 until 2008 when we stopped building them, and we haven't gone above 600 since then. So although the new homes are $400,000 now, the homes we built in the 1990s are also unaffordable because we haven't built as many homes the last 18 years as we did from 1990 to 2008.
Supply and demand.
May I have one more thing?
Yes.
So, thank you. I just looked at our market stats. So when we look at supply and demand balance, we usually look at 3 to 6 months worth of inventory. So if there is so many houses on the market, if no more came on the market, it would take 3 to 6 months to sell them. Right now, there's 201 listings in the Valparaiso city. That's 1.8 months of supply.
Wow.
In our 7-county area, we usually, when we see a balanced market, we usually see about 6,500 listings in 7 counties. Right now, I just looked, and we have more than we had over the last couple of weeks. We have 2,119 in 7 counties.
We have less than a third.
Yes. And that we have not been a balanced market since 2016 in 7 counties.
Jill is a representative from the Northwest Indiana Association of Realtors, by the way. Nathan's an agent, so just to point out who's speaking here.
This is such good data. Okay.
My dream.
Your turn.
My dream. Well, my dream is easy. At the United Way, we want to live in a world where everyone has an opportunity to thrive. And the best way for a hardworking family, for somebody who's working their job, to actually build wealth in this country is through homeownership. We need more desirable, small A, affordable homes at every price point. The second thing, we need more high-paying construction jobs building those houses. We solve 2 problems.
Beautiful, Rick. Thank you. Thank you to the panel. If we could give them a hand. So this policy discussion, we're going to now break up into tables, and I'm going to ask you to stroll over to a table and join in, drag a chair with you. But we're going to make into 4 groups, 4 or 5 groups actually. I think we have 5 tables. Okay. I just want to make a point. So this idea of supply and demand, as we continue to talk about it, if we're already seeing lots going on at the high end, and the folks who can build high end are building to the demand, right? But yet we still have this supply issue. It may very well be that we're not building enough of for the folks that are looking for housing that's more affordable. So looking at that 150 to 200, I think I said earlier, 180 to 250 range, looking at those layers below that, assuming that if it can be financed, meaning I've got a buyer that can afford it or a renter that can afford it, and the bank's willing to do it, which is typically the high end, then our supply issue does fall into those lower areas, and we need to start looking into it. This exercise that we're going to do is designed to help you think about the nuances of this, which we've been kind of talking about. So if you want to make your way to a table, I'm going to give each table some instructions. And I promise, once we get done with this and we debrief, we'll let you go, but I think this is really the next step in trying to understand what we're really up